When I turned 67, I crocheted a scarf for my granddaughter and waited for someone to knock on my door. I had wrapped the gifts, baked gingerbread, and set the table for 5, just like every year. But this time, no one came. That same morning, I saw my granddaughter's Instagram story. They were in a snowy Tahoe lodge, laughing by the fire, wearing matching pajamas. I wasn't invited. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just smiled, poured myself a glass of wine, and called my lawyer. It was time they learned whose name was still on the deed. My name is Eleanor. I'm 67, retired, and I live in the guest room of the house I once owned. It's not a sad story. Not yet, at least. After my husband passed away 6 years ago, and the upkeep of the old house became too much, my son Michael insisted I move in with him, his wife Emily, and their daughter Sophie. It'll be good for everyone, he said. You'll be around family. Sophie adores you, and we've got the space. At the time, it sounded like a blessing. Their house sits on a quiet street just outside Sacramento. It has clean white siding, a rose bush by the mailbox, and a backyard swing set that creaks in the wind. My room is downstairs, next to the laundry room. It's small but cozy. Emily had placed fresh linens on the bed before I arrived, and Sophie drew me a picture of our new home with glitter glue and crayons. I framed it and put it on the dresser. Most mornings start the same. I wake up around 6, make myself a cup of tea, and sit by the kitchen window watching the sun come up. I cook breakfast, oatmeal for myself, scrambled eggs for the others if they want them, and help Sophie pack her lunch. Then Emily takes over. "I've got it from here," she always says, with a gentle smile that somehow still feels like a dismissal. So I step aside. After they leave for work and school, I tidy up. Not because they ask, but because I want to help. I dust the living room, wipe down the counters, fold the blankets they forget on the couch. I do the laundry, my own and sometimes theirs. It keeps me busy. It keeps me useful. Afternoons are quiet. I read, crochet, water the plants. On Mondays and Thursdays, I volunteer for Meals on Wheels for seniors who live alone. The irony isn't lost on me. Michael works late most nights, and when he gets home, he's exhausted. We exchange brief conversations in the kitchen. He tells me about his meetings, I ask about Sophie's school. Emily is always polite, always measured. She never says anything cruel. She doesn't need to. Dinner is usually just the 3 of them at the dining table upstairs. I eat downstairs, or sometimes on the patio, under the string lights I hung up myself last summer. Emily says it's because they're helping Sophie establish routines, that keeping things consistent helps her focus. I don't argue. I nod, smile, and take my plate to go. Still, I'm grateful. Really. I know there are people my age living in facilities, forgotten. I have a roof over my head. I get to see my granddaughter grow up. Sophie hugs me every morning before school, and that's worth more than anything. There are family photos on the wall in the living room, vacations, birthdays, baby showers. One picture in particular catches my eye every time I pass. Christmas last year. Sophie in a red dress, Michael holding her, Emily beside him, arms around each other. Everyone smiling. A perfect family moment. But if you look closely, there's a gap where someone else once stood. The edge of a sleeve, the hint of gray hair. It was me, cropped out. At first, I thought maybe it was just the angle. Then I noticed the frame had been opened and resealed. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to cause tension. Maybe it was accidental. Or maybe it was easier to make the wall look perfect that way. Sometimes, when I pass that photo, I pause for just a second longer than I should. Then I move on. I remind myself this is temporary, that I'm just a guest, even if I once paid the mortgage on this very house, even if I'm the one who taught Michael how to change a tire, how to ride a bike, how to say thank you. They've built their own life now. I'm just here, for now, to help where I can, to be close, to belong even if it's only halfway. That's what I told myself every morning, until Christmas. Eleanor's presence in the house was quiet, almost invisible. But without her, the seams would start to fray. She woke before everyone, turned on the heater in the winter, and made sure Sophie's gloves were dry by the door. She swept crumbs from the floor before anyone noticed, refilled the soap dispensers, and kept track of the light bulbs that needed replacing. No one asked her to do these things, but no one offered to take them over either. Emily always spoke kindly, but with edges. "Mom, you don't have to do that. You should rest," she'd say with a warm smile, watching Eleanor rinse out Sophie's lunchbox. Or, "Let me handle dinner tonight. You've already done so much." And then, if Eleanor insisted, Emily would press a hand to her arm and add, "Really, Mom, it's better for Sophie to see us do things independently." Eleanor nodded, each time a little slower. The words were always gentle, never rude, but they carried weight. They were reminders of boundaries not drawn in ink, but etched in silence. Michael, for his part, stayed in the neutral zone. If Emily brushed Eleanor off, he'd change the subject. If Eleanor looked hurt, he'd pretend not to see. He was a good man. Eleanor believed that. But his job consumed him, and his wife's opinions often arrived already decided. He wasn't cruel, just absent. Sometimes, during family dinners, Michael would catch Eleanor's eye and offer a small, apologetic smile. It said, "I know." But it never came with words or action. And slowly, those smiles faded too. Sophie was the only one who made Eleanor feel real. The little girl would run into her room after school, climb onto her lap with a book or a question, or sometimes just to braid her hair. "Grandma, your silver strands look like moonlight," she'd said once. Eleanor had laughed, but the compliment warmed her for days. They had their own little rituals: Friday night puzzles on the patio, baking muffins on rainy Sundays, reading mystery books with flashlights under the covers. Eleanor kept a notebook where she wrote down the funny things Sophie said. She wanted to remember all of it, just in case. In those moments, Eleanor didn't feel like a guest. She felt like a grandmother, like family. Still, she was careful. She didn't overstep. When Sophie asked if Grandma could come to the science fair, Emily had answered first, "Of course, sweetheart, but let's not overwhelm the room. Maybe just me and Dad this time." Eleanor had smiled and said she understood. She always said she understood. And then there were the things left unsaid, like the time Eleanor offered to drive Sophie to her ballet class, only for Emily to gently decline, "Your car's a bit old, Mom, and it's a short drive." Or when Eleanor made chicken pot pie for dinner and found it untouched in the fridge, replaced by takeout. Each event was small on its own, but together they formed a pattern, a mosaic of boundaries Eleanor hadn't realized she was crossing, or perhaps a new family portrait where she no longer fit. She started keeping her own schedule, her own meals. She waited until the house was empty to vacuum. She turned down the volume on the TV so she wouldn't disturb the upstairs. She did her chores during the quietest hours, when even the floorboards didn't dare creak. Sometimes she caught Emily watching her from the kitchen doorway, her arms folded, eyes soft but unreadable. "Mom," she'd say, "you don't have to try so hard." But trying was all Eleanor had left. She thought of saying something, of explaining how she felt more like a housekeeper than a mother, more like a tenant than a parent. But she couldn't find the words that wouldn't sound accusatory or worse, ungrateful. Because the truth was, no one had been overtly cruel. There had been no shouting, no slamming doors, just a steady erosion of space, of purpose, of voice. And Eleanor, too polite to confront, too proud to beg, simply shrank, except with Sophie. When that little girl reached for her hand or asked to hear stories from when Dad was her age, Eleanor remembered who she was. Not a burden, not a ghost, but a woman who had once raised a family, a woman who had taught her son kindness even if he'd forgotten its shape, and a woman who still had more to give, if only someone wanted it. It started with a question from Sophie, They were sitting on the back porch one Thursday afternoon, coloring snowflakes together while sipping hot cocoa. The air smelled of cinnamon and wood smoke, and Eleanor was mid-sentence, telling Sophie about the time Michael built a snowman taller than the fence, when Sophie looked up and asked, "Grandma, are you coming to Tahoe with us this year?" The question hung in the air like frost. Eleanor blinked. "Tahoe?" Sophie nodded. "Yeah, for Christmas. Daddy said we're going to the same cabin with the fireplace and the hot tub and that big sledding hill, remember?" "I didn't know you were going," Eleanor said slowly, keeping her voice light. Sophie shrugged and returned to her coloring. "Maybe it's a surprise." That evening, Eleanor brought it up in the kitchen as Emily stirred a pot of soup. "Michael didn't mention anything about Tahoe," Eleanor said casually, arranging bowls on the counter. Emily didn't look up. "Oh yes, we were thinking of doing something small, just to reset the year, after everything that's happened." Eleanor smiled, though she wasn't sure what everything meant. "That sounds lovely." Emily finally glanced her way. "But nothing said. We're just talking about it." The conversation ended there, but the seed had been planted. The next day, while putting away laundry in Michael and Emily's room, a task Emily had reluctantly allowed after Eleanor insisted, Eleanor noticed a folder partially tucked under a stack of magazines on the dresser. She reached for it, meaning to straighten the pile, when a slip of paper fell out. A printed itinerary. Hotel Lakeview Lodge, December 22nd to December 27th. 5 guests. 1 king suite, 2 adjoining queen rooms. 5. Eleanor stared at the number. The house had 4 people. Michael, Emily, Sophie, and? Her name was nowhere on the paper. It wasn't addressed to her. She slid the page back into the folder and returned everything exactly as she found it. Her hands trembled as she smoothed the fabric of the duvet. That evening, Michael mentioned nothing. Neither did Emily. Sophie ran to Eleanor's room before bedtime, full of excitement about snow boots and hot chocolate and snowmen taller than her dad. Eleanor smiled and nodded, her chest tight with something she didn't have a name for yet. 2 days later, the mail came. Emily usually sorted it, but Eleanor happened to be the one to bring it in that morning. She sifted through the stack, setting aside bills and catalogs. Then she saw it. A red and green envelope addressed to the Harrisons. Inside was a Christmas party invitation from the Lakeview Lodge. "We're so excited to host your family again this holiday season," it read in gold lettering. "As requested, your itinerary has been customized for 5 guests. Enjoy complimentary s'mores kits and family portraits by the fireplace." Eleanor's breath caught. The names listed for welcome gifts included Michael, Emily, Sophie, Aunt Rachel, and Uncle Nate. Her name was not there. The invitation must have been sent in error. Perhaps it was meant for Emily's parents. Or perhaps not. That night, Eleanor left the envelope on the kitchen island under the pretenses of, "This must have been for you." Emily barely glanced at it. "Oh yeah, I think it was for Rachel. She's coming out to visit after the new year. Nothing confirmed." The words were soft. The eyes didn't meet hers. Eleanor nodded, smiling as always, and walked back to her room. She sat on the edge of her bed, hands folded in her lap. On the wall opposite her, Sophie's glitter-glue drawing of their new home sparkled under the lamp. The little stick figures all held hands, Mom, Dad, Sophie, and Grandma. Underneath, in uneven letters, Sophie had written, "My family forever." But it didn't feel like forever anymore. It didn't even feel like family. It felt like something quieter, colder. Like the first crack in winter ice, barely visible but ready to split wide open. Christmas morning began with silence. Eleanor woke early, as she always did. The house was still, the kind of quiet that felt hollow, not peaceful. The sky outside the window was pale blue, streaked with silver clouds. She slipped into her slippers, tied her robe, and moved through the kitchen like she had every year, preparing coffee, warming up the oven, checking the cinnamon rolls she'd made the night before. It was 6:30 a.m. The stockings were still hung. The tree twinkled softly in the corner. The gifts she had wrapped with gold foil and red bows, especially the ones for Sophie, sat carefully arranged by the fireplace. One had a scarf inside, crocheted with a snowflake pattern. Another held a puzzle of the solar system. She'd chosen it because Sophie had said she wanted to be an astronaut one day. Eleanor brewed tea and sat down with a blanket over her lap, waiting to hear the creak of footsteps upstairs. Any moment now, Sophie would come running down, squealing with excitement, Emily trailing behind her with a phone ready to take pictures. But no one came. By 7:30, she checked the driveway. The car was gone. Her heart thudded. She checked the garage. Michael's truck was missing too. She called Emily's phone, voicemail. She tried Michael's. No answer. She stood by the kitchen island, phone in hand, tea growing cold beside her. Maybe they'd stepped out for a surprise. Maybe they'd gone to pick up something festive. Maybe... Her phone buzzed. It was a notification from Instagram. Sophie had posted a story. Eleanor's thumb hovered over the screen for half a second, then tapped. The image loaded slowly, as if giving her one last chance to brace herself. There was Sophie, cheeks pink, bundled in a red puffer coat and beanie. Behind her, snow-covered trees, a log cabin with smoke curling from the chimney, and Michael crouched in front of a sled. Text over the top. White Christmas with my real family. Eleanor stared at it, her breath catching somewhere between her chest and throat. Real family? Another photo came next, Emily holding a mug of cocoa standing by a roaring fireplace. A third, Michael and Sophie decorating cookies in matching pajamas. The next few stories blurred into each other. Twinkling lights, laughter, a perfectly arranged dinner table with 5 place settings. She wasn't in any of them. Of course she wasn't. But it wasn't just that they'd left. It was that they'd done it without a word. No goodbye, no explanation, no seat at the table, not even the courtesy of a lie. Eleanor sat back down on the couch, her body numb. She wrapped the blanket tighter around her shoulders, though the cold came from the inside. She didn't cry, not right away, not even when she opened the Christmas card she'd written for Sophie, the one she had planned to give after breakfast, and realized she wouldn't be handing it to anyone. Instead, she stood, walked to the base of the tree, and picked up one of the gifts, Sophie's, the one with the scarf. She held it for a moment, running her fingers over the smooth wrapping paper before placing it gently back. They hadn't taken any of the presents she left. Not one. All were untouched, like she was the only one who remembered they were there. She stood in front of the tree for a long time. Eventually, she returned to the kitchen and took out a single cinnamon roll. She reheated it in the microwave, poured herself a second cup of tea, and sat at the dining table. Alone. The spot where Sophie usually sat was perfectly clean. No plate, no crumbs, no laughter. She stared at the chair for several minutes, then at the place setting she'd arranged with a sprig of holly tucked inside the napkin ring. It felt staged now, like a set for a play that had been canceled without notice. At 10:15, another photo appeared on her phone. This time, it wasn't from Sophie. It was Emily. A perfectly posed family shot in front of the Tahoe Lodge. Michael on one side, Emily on the other, Sophie in the middle, everyone in matching white and red flannel pajamas. Below it, a caption, "Best Christmas ever, just us." Eleanor put the phone down, her hands trembling. For a long time, she said nothing, felt nothing. Then she stood, walked into the living room, and slowly began to unhook the stockings from the mantel, one by one, folding them gently, placing them in a drawer. She unplugged the lights on the tree, blew out the cinnamon-scented candle. The room dimmed. She moved through the motions not like someone defeated, but like someone clearing space, making room for something else. The betrayal didn't hit all at once. It seeped in, quietly, like a draft through a cracked window. It was the absence that hurt the most, the deliberate, calculated exclusion. They hadn't forgotten her. They had made a choice. And for the first time, Eleanor realized something undeniable. They didn't see her as family. Not anymore. By noon, Eleanor had stopped checking the front door. The cinnamon roll sat half-eaten on her plate. The tea had gone cold, untouched. She stood at the kitchen sink, washing dishes she hadn't used just to keep her hands moving. The silence inside the house was louder than ever. She picked up her phone and dialed Michael. It rang twice before going to voicemail. She waited, then called again. This time, it connected. "Hi, Mom," he answered. Voice distant, wind blowing faintly in the background. Eleanor swallowed. "Michael, where are you?" A pause. "We're in Tahoe. Emily mentioned it, right?" "No," Eleanor said calmly. She didn't. Another pause. Longer this time. "I thought—" Michael cleared his throat. "We figured you might want to rest. The holidays can be overwhelming, and we thought—" "You thought I'd rather be alone?" Eleanor asked, her voice soft but steady. He sighed. "It's just a few days, Mom. Sophie wanted something different this year, less pressure." There it was, less pressure. She let that sit in the air, heavy and unspoken. "I see," she said finally. Michael didn't respond. "I hope Sophie enjoys her Christmas," she added. "Tell her I loved the drawings she made." "I will," he said quietly. They hung up. No apology, no invitation to join them, just polite dismissal dressed as concern. Eleanor stared at the phone in her hand until the screen went dark. She opened Instagram again. There were more updates now. Sophie making a snow angel, Emily holding a glass of wine by the fire, Michael laughing as he pulled Sophie on a sled. But it wasn't the images that hurt the most. It was the comments. Under Emily's latest post, her holding a wine glass in front of a Christmas tree wrapped in golden ribbon, someone had written, "You all look so happy. Finally getting the break you deserve." Another, "Good to be away from the drama this year, huh?" And then the one that made Eleanor's fingers freeze mid-scroll. "No old traditions this year, fresh start." It was the caption. Emily had written it beneath the photo of herself alone in front of the fireplace. The same room where Eleanor had once told Sophie stories about how her father used to burn marshmallows. No old traditions. Eleanor placed the phone face down on the counter. Her vision blurred for a moment, not from tears, but from the pressure building behind her eyes. She walked slowly to the living room. The tree still stood, twinkling, ornaments carefully hung by her own hands. She had wrapped each gift with matching ribbons, coordinated bows, labeled tags in calligraphy. No one had opened them. No one even acknowledged them. She sat on the couch and stared at the lights. For years, Eleanor had been the curator of Christmas. She had baked, decorated, planned, and preserved the rituals of family. Now those very rituals had been discarded like tinsel in January. She remembered Sophie's giggles while helping her make sugar cookies, Michael sneaking extra marshmallows into his cocoa as a boy, her late husband singing carols out of tune just to make them laugh. She'd kept all of that alive, and now she had been erased, not with cruelty, not even with confrontation, just with silence. And maybe that was worse. She stood and made her way to the spare closet near the laundry room, her closet. She opened it slowly, looking at the small collection of gifts she hadn't yet wrapped. One was a necklace for Emily, sterling silver with a small blue gem. Eleanor had chosen it because it reminded her of Emily's eyes. She stared at it for a long moment. Then she placed it back on the shelf. Later that evening, as dusk fell, she took a walk through the neighborhood. The houses glowed with cheer, lights strung along roofs, inflatable snowmen bobbing on lawns, the smell of pine and cinnamon in the air. Everywhere she looked, families gathered around fireplaces, laughter echoed from windows, music drifted from living rooms, and Eleanor walked through it like a ghost. When she returned, she passed by the living room and stopped in front of the fireplace. The stockings she had embroidered sat in a neat pile, folded. The space felt hollow, like a theater after the final performance. She didn't turn on the lights. She poured herself a glass of wine, sat on the couch in the dark, and stared into the quiet. Then she whispered aloud, "No old traditions, huh?" She took a sip, and for the first time in years, she stopped trying to make it feel like home. The morning after Christmas, Eleanor woke to silence once again, but it no longer felt like absence. It felt like clarity. She made a cup of black coffee, no cream, no sugar. She didn't turn on the holiday music station. She didn't bother with breakfast. Instead, she walked into the laundry room, opened the closet, and pulled down the old banker's box she hadn't touched since she moved in. Inside were folders, receipts, tax forms, photocopies of medical records, letters from the mortgage lender. Eleanor sat on the floor and began sorting, placing everything into piles. At first, she didn't know what she was looking for, but somewhere inside her, she sensed that Christmas morning had only been the tip of something much deeper. At 10:13 a.m., she found it. Folded inside a thin manila envelope labeled House 2016 was a packet of stapled pages, an unsigned draft of a property transfer agreement. Her hands trembled as she read. She remembered the conversation clearly now. Michael had approached her about transferring the house title years ago. "It'll make refinancing easier," he'd said. "It's just paperwork. Nothing changes." She hadn't thought twice. At the time, she'd trusted him. Of course she had. But as she scanned the document, one detail stood out. Nowhere on the pages did it say the title had actually changed hands. No official stamps, no completed fields, no signatures from a county clerk. It was a draft. Nothing more. Eleanor's breath caught. She flipped to the final page and saw a handwritten note in Michael's scrawl. "Need Mom's signature next week, then notarize." But there was no signature. Not hers, not anyone's. She pulled out another file, this one from the lender. A statement from the refinancing company dated 6 months after the draft agreement. The loan had been approved in Michael's name, using the house as collateral. But the owner listed on the accompanying property tax record? Eleanor Harrison. Her name, her house. She sat back against the wall. Papers fanned around her like fallen leaves. All this time, she had believed the home now belonged to Michael and Emily. She'd been told it was easier that way, that she didn't need to worry about upkeep, insurance, taxes. And yet, on every legal document that mattered, she was still the sole listed owner. Her heart pounded. They were living in her house, planning vacations without her, celebrating holidays without her, and, if Sophie's story and the lodge's welcome email were to be believed, inviting others in her place. Eleanor stood and walked slowly back to the kitchen. Her phone buzzed with a new email, a newsletter from her bank. Unimportant, probably, but something about it pulled at her curiosity. She opened the app, checked her account, and clicked through to the mortgage tab. The most recent payment had been made 2 weeks ago by direct deposit from an account under Michael Harrison. But when she cross-referenced it with her records, the payment had gone toward a home equity line of credit, one she'd never applied for. She froze. It was in her name. She stared at the screen for a long moment before pressing the call button for the bank's fraud department. "Yes, I'd like to verify some recent activity on a property loan," she said. Her voice was calm, measured, but every muscle in her body was locked in tension. The representative confirmed that the HELOC had been opened 18 months prior. All documents had been submitted electronically. The digital signature was listed as E. Harrison. "I didn't sign that," Eleanor said. "That's not my authorization." There was silence on the other end of the line. Then came the instructions. File a report, fax a written statement, contact a property attorney. She hung up and sat back in her chair. They hadn't just left her out of Christmas. They were selling her out, piece by piece. She looked out the kitchen window at the yard she had once tended herself, where Michael had played with his toy dump trucks, where she and her husband had planted that maple tree the year Sophie was born. They were planning to take it all, and they thought she wouldn't notice. She picked up the stack of papers and walked back to her room. She found her leather notebook, the one she usually reserved for grocery lists and recipes, and began making a new list. Contact real estate attorney. Request property title report from county office. Gather all documentation of original purchase, refinance, and taxes. Search for additional unauthorized financial activity. Play dumb. That last one, she underlined twice, because now she knew something they didn't. They thought she was fragile, easy to ignore, easy to outmaneuver. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. She had built this house from the ground up, and she wasn't leaving it quietly. Eleanor didn't waste time. The morning after her call to the bank, she reached out to a law firm specializing in elder financial abuse. The woman who answered, Clara Jameson, sounded sharp, composed, and unhurried. "Bring everything you've got," she said, "and come alone." By 3 around that afternoon, Eleanor was sitting in a quiet corner office downtown, watching Clara flip through the folders she'd brought. Mortgage statements, unsigned title drafts, digital loan documents, property tax records. When Clara looked up, her expression was unreadable. "Mrs. Harrison," she said, "this is extensive and deeply concerning." Eleanor only nodded. "From what I see," Clara continued, "your son leveraged a property he doesn't own to open a home equity line of credit in your name. That's identity fraud. The worst part is, your ownership was never legally relinquished. The title's still yours." "I suspected that," Eleanor replied, "but I needed to be sure." Clara leaned back in her chair. "And now you are." Bio, it was the first time someone had said it aloud, that she wasn't crazy, that what had happened wasn't just careless, it was deliberate. They discussed next steps, obtaining certified records from the county, issuing a cease and desist to the financial institution, and, if necessary, pressing charges. But Clara was careful. "This won't be fast," she warned, "or easy. Family fraud rarely is." Eleanor nodded. "I'm not here for revenge," she said. "I just want to take back what's mine." On her way home, Eleanor stopped by the storage unit she'd rented during the move. It was a small space, barely large enough for a few boxes and furniture, but inside were the remnants of her old life, framed pictures, kitchenware, her late husband's tools, and memories. She opened a heavy-lidded box labeled "Personal, Don't Toss," and began to dig. There, wrapped in an old scarf, was a leather envelope. Inside it, folded crisply, was a letter. The handwriting was familiar, strong, looped cursive. Her husband's. She hadn't read it in years. Eleanor sat on the concrete floor and opened it. "Ellie," it began, "if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and I hate that. But I need you to know something. I didn't work 40 years in a factory just to leave behind a house with my name on it. That house is yours. I built it for you. For us. Don't let anyone take that from you, especially not people who smile when they lie." She stopped reading. Her eyes blurred. She'd forgotten that letter, forgotten how deliberate he'd been, even in goodbye. Her husband had never trusted easily, but he'd trusted her completely. And now, somehow, he was reminding her not to forget her own strength. She kept digging through the box. Underneath old photo albums and a sealed bag of dried lavender, she found a frame, face down. It was their wedding photo. The day was overcast in the picture, but they'd both been laughing. Eleanor opened the back of the frame to straighten the photograph. Something was tucked behind the matting, a folded piece of yellowed legal paper. She pulled it out. It was the original property deed, signed, stamped, filed under Eleanor Harrison. Her breath caught. She ran her finger along the embossed seal. This was the document Michael had claimed had been updated years ago. The one she'd assumed was replaced. It had never gone anywhere. It had just been forgotten. Or hidden. She placed it gently into her purse, next to her husband's letter, and zipped it closed with both hands. That night, back at home, she sat by the tree, still decorated, still glowing faintly in the corner. The presents remained unopened. The house remained quiet. But something had shifted. She wasn't afraid anymore. She wasn't doubting her memory or her rights or her place in that home. She knew who she was, and she knew what had been done. Upstairs, in Sophie's room, the child's laughter echoed faintly through a video call with a cousin. It was the only sound of joy in the house, but it didn't reach down here. Not yet. Eleanor stood and went to her bedroom. She opened her notebook and added a few more items to the list. Secure originals in fireproof box. Call notary. Draft letter to Sophie. Tell her the truth, but gently. Record every conversation from now on. Pretend nothing's changed, because soon, everything would. Eleanor had always believed that the worst truths arrived quietly. She was in the laundry room folding towels when she heard it. Sophie's voice, high and curious, carrying through the floor vent from the upstairs hallway. Eleanor wasn't trying to listen. She was just there, motionless the way one stands in church when a hymn begins unexpectedly. "Daddy," Sophie whispered, "you said Grandma was going away, but she's still here. Did she forget?" Eleanor froze. There was a pause, the shuffle of feet, then Michael's hushed voice. "Shh, Soph. Not now." "But I thought she wasn't coming back after Christmas," Sophie said again, louder this time. Eleanor pressed her palm against the dryer, steadying herself. Her breath caught in her chest. Michael didn't answer. She waited. There was nothing more, just footsteps retreating and a door softly clicking shut. Later that night, she checked Sophie's iPad, which the girl often left charging on the kitchen counter. Eleanor didn't intend to pry. She'd never done anything like this before. But something had shifted. She needed to know. She tapped the voice memo app. There were dozens of recordings, school assignments, piano practice, random songs, but one file was newer than the others, time-stamped just a few days before Christmas. It was only 23 seconds long. She hit play. The recording began with muffled giggles, then Sophie's voice. "Okay, this is for me when I'm older." Then a pause. "Daddy says Grandma's going to a special home. One where old people get rest and don't have to be in the way. But I don't think Grandma's in the way. She makes muffins. She helps me with spelling. I don't want her to leave." Eleanor's throat tightened. She hit pause, then play again. Just to be sure she'd heard it right. A special home. Her mind raced. Not a vacation, not a temporary trip, a facility. Michael and Emily had planned to move her. Quietly. Permanently. That night, Eleanor barely slept. She stared at the ceiling, tracing every moment of the past year, every polite dismissal, every gentle exclusion, every time Emily said, "You should rest more," or, "We've got it from here." They hadn't been nudges toward comfort. They'd been rehearsals for her removal. The next morning, she dug deeper. In her files, she found a document she hadn't noticed before, a printed copy of a bank authorization form. It looked official, with her name typed neatly at the top. But the signature at the bottom? It wasn't hers. She stared at it, tilted her head, compared it to one of her own checks. The loops were wrong. The E was too sharp, the H too round. A forgery, subtle, but unmistakable. She found 3 more like it tucked into a folder labeled Joint Accounts. Each bore transactions she hadn't authorized, wire transfers to Michael's company, payments for a private counselor Emily had seen, a $9,000 deposit into an account Eleanor didn't recognize. She photocopied everything and returned the originals to their places, just as she'd found them. The truth began to settle, heavier than any betrayal before it. Michael hadn't just lied, he'd allowed his wife to orchestrate a quiet, calculated erasure, and Eleanor had almost let it happen. Almost. She picked up her phone and called Clara, the attorney. "I need to escalate," she said. Clara's voice was calm. "What happened?" Eleanor didn't go into detail. Not yet, but she promised to bring the new documents the next morning. "Also," she added, "can we talk about power of attorney? revoking anything that might be active? There was a pause. Absolutely, Clara replied. We'll make sure no one speaks for you but you. That evening, Eleanor watched Sophie as she sat on the living room floor drawing a picture of a treehouse. The girl looked up and smiled. Can we build one of these someday, Grandma? Eleanor smiled back, though her heart ached. Maybe, she said, if we find the right tree. Because the roots of this house, of this family, had rotted quietly, and now she saw every limb for what it truly was. She wasn't just being pushed out, she was being erased, and the time for silence was over. Eleanor had never hosted a party with such precision. It was scheduled for January 2nd, just after the New Year, far enough from the holidays to seem like a reset, close enough to suggest reconciliation. The invitation she handwrote for Michael, Emily, and even Aunt Rachel was short and sweet. Dinner at home, 6 p.m. Let's start the year right together. She left the note on the kitchen island. Emily raised an eyebrow when she saw it. Oh, she said, that's nice of you, Mom. You don't have to go through the trouble. No trouble, Eleanor replied smoothly. It's time we cleared the air. Emily nodded, her smile carefully measured. That sounds lovely. Over the next few days, Eleanor went about preparing like she always had. She made lists, tested recipes, polished the silverware. She pulled out the linen napkins Emily had boxed away last year and reheated candles that still smelled faintly of pine and clove. But this wasn't just a dinner, it was a setup. The first call she made was to Clara. I need your help, in person, Eleanor said. Clara didn't hesitate. I'll come as a guest, quiet, observant. I won't interfere unless necessary. No, Eleanor said, her voice firm. You'll come as staff. A server, you'll pour wine, pass dishes, and keep your eyes open. There was a pause on the line, then Clara's low chuckle. I always did enjoy theater. They arranged everything. Clara would arrive early, dressed in black, clipboard in hand. She'd pretend to take inventory, but she'd be recording. Audio, video, and legal timestamping on a hidden device in her blazer pocket. She'd log every word said, every reaction, every shift in tone. If Michael or Emily slipped, even slightly, Clara would catch it. But Eleanor wasn't relying solely on confrontation. She knew her son. He would deflect, apologize without substance, redirect. Emily would remain calm, measured, playing the role of the gracious, misunderstood daughter-in-law. They'd try to turn it into a misunderstanding, a family miscommunication. So Eleanor had prepared something else, a letter. She wrote it in the early hours of the morning, sitting by the fireplace while the rest of the house slept. It was addressed to Sophie and sealed with wax. She tucked it into a small envelope and placed it in the drawer of her nightstand. On the outside, she wrote in careful script, "Open only if I'm not here." Inside, she told Sophie the truth. Not everything. The girl was still young, but enough. Enough for her to know that her grandmother had never left by choice, that love had never wavered, that when people hurt you quietly, it still hurt, and that leaving wasn't weakness, it was survival. Eleanor reread the letter twice. On the third pass, she cried, but only for a moment. She had no illusions about what this dinner was. It wasn't a reconciliation, it was a performance. The final act before the curtains closed. The truth would not come with shouting or slamming doors. It would arrive with documents, recordings, and names on deeds. She prepared the guest list, printed menus, even made place cards. Michael, Emily, Rachel, Sophie, Clara. Hers read, Eleanor, host. That label, she realized, mattered more than any title they had tried to strip from her. She was the host. She always had been. The day before the dinner, she moved quietly through the house, gathering a few final things. She removed her wedding photo from the frame, tucking it into her handbag. She pulled down the crocheted angel from the top of the Christmas tree and packed it in tissue. She collected a small stack of Sophie's drawings and placed them in a folder labeled Keep. Not memories, not scraps. Keep. In the laundry room, she took one last look at the closet where her life had once been condensed into labeled boxes and polite limits. She smiled, because the house wasn't a prison. It was a stage, and she was ready for her exit. That night, she looked in on Sophie one last time before bed. The child was sleeping, arms wrapped around a stuffed rabbit Eleanor had stitched when Sophie was 4. Her breath was even, peaceful. Eleanor whispered, "I love you," and closed the door. Back in her room, she checked the list again. Final copies of property deed, documents for Clara, video-audio recording devices tested, power of attorney revoked, letter to Sophie sealed. She turned off the light. Tomorrow, she would smile. She would serve wine. And when the time came, she would tell them the truth. Not for their sake, but for hers. The table was set as if for peace. White porcelain plates, silver chargers, cloth napkins folded into perfect fans. In the center, Eleanor had arranged pine branches and cranberries around tall candles. The smell of rosemary chicken filled the air. Everything looked beautiful, normal, safe. By 5:45 p.m., Eleanor stood at the kitchen island, adjusting the wine glasses for the 3rd time. She wore a deep burgundy dress she hadn't put on in years, simple, elegant, the kind of fabric that moved like memory. Her hair was pinned up. Her pearls glowed faintly under the chandelier. Clara arrived first, dressed in black as planned, blending in like any catering assistant. She carried a tray and a clipboard, nodded once to Eleanor, and began moving through the space with professional efficiency. At 5:59, the door opened. Michael stepped in, cheeks pink from the cold, Sophie bounding ahead of him, holding a small gift bag. "Grandma!" she shouted, wrapping her arms around Eleanor's waist. Eleanor knelt, hugged her tight, and whispered, "Merry Christmas, my love." Emily followed close behind, wearing a sleek green dress and a practiced smile. "Everything looks amazing, Mom," she said, kissing Eleanor's cheek. "You really went all out." "It's been a while since we had a real sit-down dinner," Eleanor replied. "Thought we could start the year right." Michael chuckled. "Yeah, a fresh start." They didn't notice Clara, who handed them drinks like any other server would, silent and efficient. Emily raised her glass. "To family," she said, "and to you, Mom, for everything you've done." Eleanor lifted hers with a nod. "To the truth." They clinked glasses. Clara lingered nearby, pretending to adjust cutlery. Dinner began in pleasant silence. Roast chicken, herbed potatoes, homemade rolls. Sophie chatted about school. Emily commented on the flavor of the glaze. Michael asked about Eleanor's knitting projects. Everything was polite, performative. But Eleanor watched them carefully. The way Michael's eyes avoided hers. The way Emily's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. The tension sat just under the surface, like ice beneath snow. When the plates were cleared and dessert, cranberry tart with whipped cream, was served, Eleanor leaned forward slightly and said, "Before we end the night, I thought we could play something." Emily tilted her head. "Oh?" "A little family trivia," Eleanor said. "Just a few questions, for fun." Sophie clapped her hands. "I love games." Michael looked amused. "Sure, Mom. Why not?" Eleanor reached under her chair and pulled out a small stack of index cards. She shuffled them with steady hands. Clara appeared at her side, offering fresh wine as Eleanor turned to her guests. "First question," she said, smiling. "Who remembers the year we bought this house?" Michael blinked. 1991? "Correct," Eleanor said. "Your father and I signed the papers in February. It was the coldest winter on record." Emily smiled politely. "That's a long time ago." "Second question," Eleanor continued. "Who's the legal owner of this house as of today?" There was a pause. Michael's smile faltered. "You transferred it to me a few years back, remember? For refinancing." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure?" Emily jumped in. "We always thought so. I mean, that's what we discussed, right?" Eleanor set the card down. Clara, silent until now, stepped forward and placed a thin file folder on the table. "According to county records," she said, "Eleanor Harrison remains the sole legal owner." Emily's eyes narrowed. "Who is she?" Eleanor didn't answer. Instead, she picked up the next card. "Final question," she said, voice steady. "Who signed for a home equity line of credit in my name, without my knowledge?" Michael stood. "Mom, I don't think—" "Sit," Eleanor said, not unkindly. He hesitated, then obeyed. "I know everything," she said, voice quiet but firm. "Every transaction, every forged form, every conversation I wasn't meant to hear." Emily's hands tightened around her wine glass. Sophie looked confused, turning from one adult to the next. "We'll get to the rest in a moment," Eleanor said, gathering the cards. "But first, let's take a short break." She stood and walked into the kitchen, where Clara followed. Behind them, the dining room sat in stunned silence. But the show had only just begun. Eleanor returned to the dining room holding a small black audio recorder and a manila envelope. Michael looked up, his brow furrowed. Emily crossed her arms. Sophie, sensing the tension, sat very still. "I wasn't going to do this," Eleanor said softly, "but I believe the only thing more painful than betrayal is pretending it didn't happen." She set the recorder down on the table, pressed play. Sophie's voice filled the room, soft, innocent. "Daddy says Grandma's going to a special home, one where old people get rest and don't have to be in the way." The words hung like smoke. Michael's face drained of color. Eleanor clicked stop. "I'm sorry," she said, turning gently to Sophie. "You weren't supposed to know what they were planning, but you knew. You always see more than people think." Sophie's lips trembled. Her eyes darted to her parents. Eleanor opened the envelope and pulled out the first document, a copy of the property deed. "This house," she said, laying the paper flat, "was never legally transferred. I am still the sole owner. The signatures you said I gave, never mine." Emily opened her mouth, but Eleanor raised a hand. "I'm not finished." She pulled out the second item, a worn letter in familiar handwriting. "Before your father passed, he left me this." She unfolded the page slowly. He wrote, "Don't let anyone take the house, especially people who smile when they lie." The silence grew heavier. Michael looked down at his hands. Emily tapped a finger against her wine glass, fast, nervous. "And then there's this," Eleanor said, placing the final paper on the table, an official bank notice dated 8 months prior. "It's a report I filed for a lost debit card. The same day someone used that card to authorize a $9,000 transfer into a business account. The authorization was recorded under my name, but I was here. And the signature on file?" She slid a copy across the table. Emily glanced at it and immediately turned to Michael. "You said you'd take care of that. You said she'd never find out." Michael didn't respond. "You said she signed the paperwork. You told me it was already approved." Still, he said nothing. "You told me it was her idea to—" She stopped, breathing hard. Eleanor watched them both quietly, hands folded. "I never signed anything," she said. "You both knew that. You just hoped I wouldn't notice. You planned to move me into a facility, sell the house, disappear me." Emily shook her head. "No, that's not—" "Yes, it is," Eleanor interrupted, her voice sharp now. "It was calculated, and it almost worked." Sophie stood up suddenly. "No!" she shouted. "You said Grandma was going away, but I don't want her to. She didn't do anything wrong." Michael looked at her, pained. "Sweetheart." Sophie pushed back her chair and ran to Eleanor, wrapping her arms around her waist. "Don't leave, Grandma," she sobbed. "Please don't go." Eleanor held her tightly, stroking her hair. "I'm not leaving because of you," she whispered. "You are the only part of this house that feels like home." She kissed the top of Sophie's head, then turned back to the table. "I will be contacting the authorities. Clara has already recorded everything. You'll be hearing from my lawyer and possibly a prosecutor." Emily's face twisted. "You can't do this." "I can," Eleanor said, "and I will." She handed Michael a second envelope. "These are copies of every financial record I could find. The originals are with my attorney. If you'd like to respond, do it through legal channels." Michael stared at the envelope but didn't touch it. Sophie's sobs quieted as she clung to Eleanor's side. "I didn't want this," Eleanor said to the room, "but you gave me no choice." She looked around at the table, at the half-eaten tart, the melting candles, the untouched glasses of wine, a family portrait torn at the seams. Then she said quietly, "Dinner is over." The room remained frozen after Eleanor's final words. Even the candles seemed to flicker less, subdued by the weight in the air. Michael leaned forward, finally speaking. "Mom, we can talk about this. Please, let's not involve lawyers. We're still family." Eleanor met his gaze. Her voice was calm. "Family doesn't forge signatures. Family doesn't silence the people who raised them." Emily stood abruptly. "You're overreacting. We didn't mean for it to go this far. We thought—" "You thought I'd roll over," Eleanor cut in. "You thought I'd be grateful for being erased slowly, kindly, quietly." Michael looked at the floor again. Sophie remained by Eleanor's side, gripping her hand tightly. "I'm not taking this house from you," Eleanor said, glancing at Emily. "I already gave it away." Emily froze. "What?" Eleanor reached into her handbag and pulled out a final folder. She opened it and laid the pages gently on the table. "This is a signed deed of donation. Effective last week, the house is now the property of a non-profit organization that provides housing for elderly women who've experienced familial financial abuse." Michael's mouth opened, then closed. "You gave the house away?" Emily's voice cracked. "To strangers." "Not strangers," Eleanor said. "Women like me." "You can't be serious," Emily hissed. "What about Sophie? What about us?" Eleanor looked down at her granddaughter, then back up. "I thought about Sophie. That's why I left her a letter. She'll understand in time. She's not like you. She still sees people as people." Sophie tugged Eleanor's sleeve, eyes wide. "You're really leaving?" Eleanor knelt beside her. "Yes, sweetheart, but not because of you. Never because of you." Sophie's eyes filled again. "Can I come with you?" Eleanor smiled gently. "One day, maybe. When you're older and when you want to. For now, I need to go somewhere I can feel safe. Somewhere I don't have to hide." Emily's face contorted. "You can't just walk out like this. You're our responsibility." "No," Eleanor said, standing. "I was your responsibility when I changed your diapers, when I worked nights to keep the lights on, when I stayed up with you during fevers. That time is over. You don't get to weaponize responsibility now." She walked toward the hall. Michael followed. "Where will you go? You don't even have—" "My apartment is ready," Eleanor said without looking back. 2 bedrooms by the water. I signed the lease 2 weeks ago. Everything I need is already there. I've been moving out in pieces. Today was just the finale." Michael stopped mid-step. "You planned this," he said, voice hollow. "I prepared," Eleanor corrected. "There's a difference." Clara stood by the front door, silent and composed, clipboard tucked under one arm. Eleanor gave her a nod. Emily moved toward the kitchen. "We'll fight this," she muttered. "You think some non-profit's going to keep this house from us?" "It's already done," Clara replied coolly, "and any attempt to dispute the deed will be met with counter-litigation, supported by testimony, financial evidence, and formal documentation of abuse." Emily turned to Michael, her mask cracking. "You said this would be easy. You said she wouldn't fight back." "I was wrong," Michael said. For once, he didn't look at his mother. Eleanor picked up her coat from the rack, the same one she'd hung there nearly 4 years ago when she first moved in. Quietly, respectfully, under the guise of gratitude. Sophie trailed behind her. "Will I see you again?" Eleanor turned, crouched, and kissed her forehead. "Always." She stepped outside. The air was crisp, the stars barely visible behind soft clouds. As she walked to the car Clara had arranged, Eleanor didn't look back, not once. Inside the house, voices rose. Emily arguing, Michael trying to quiet her, Sophie beginning to cry again. But it was no longer her place to fix things. She didn't need to be the glue anymore. She needed to be free. 3 months later, Eleanor awoke to the sound of gulls and the gentle crash of waves beyond her balcony. Her new apartment was modest. 2 bedrooms, soft yellow walls, and a view of the ocean just beyond the pine trees. Each morning she stepped onto the little deck with her tea and watched the world wake up in blues and golds. The second bedroom had become her sanctuary. Bookshelves lined with classics, a small writing desk, and an armchair where she spent most afternoons crocheting or journaling. A silver tabby cat named Figaro slept on the windowsill, purring softly as the breeze rustled the curtains. Eleanor's life was simple now, but full in the ways that mattered. She joined a local meditation class held twice a week at a nearby community center, where she learned to breathe in silence and listen without fear. No one there knew her as Michael's mom or Emily's mother-in-law. She was just Eleanor, sharp-eyed, soft-spoken, and, as one instructor said, stillness with strength. Sometimes she missed Sophie with a sharp ache. But then, the little girl would find ways to reach her. Once a week, Eleanor received a video message. They came from Sophie's school email, short, sweet, carefully edited. In one, she held up a drawing of a beach and a cottage with a chimney. "This is where I think you live now, Grandma. I put seagulls in because I know you love them." In another, she sang an off-key version of "You Are My Sunshine," then giggled. "I changed the lyrics. It's about you." But the one that struck deepest came in late March, just after the equinox. The video began with Sophie in front of the family Christmas tree from months before, now bare, the ornaments long packed away. She held one of the unopened gifts Eleanor had left behind, the gold ribbon still intact. "I kept this," Sophie said, looking into the camera. "They said it was just extra, but I knew it was mine." She unwrapped the box slowly. Inside was the scarf. Crocheted snowflakes, soft blue yarn, Eleanor's signature stitch. Sophie draped it around her neck. Then, in a soft voice, she said, "Grandma is my real Santa. She always knew what I needed." Eleanor watched the video in the dark, tears on her cheeks, Figaro curled beside her. She didn't reply, not directly, but she printed the frame of Sophie holding the scarf and pinned it on her wall, a reminder that love doesn't disappear when distance grows. Sometimes it grows louder. In early April, her phone rang. She saw Michael's name on the screen and debated answering. She hadn't heard from him since the dinner. After a long pause, she picked up. "Hi, Mom," he said. His voice was small, like a boy again. "I wanted to say, I'm sorry for everything, for letting it happen, for not stopping it, for not protecting you." Eleanor listened in silence. "I don't know how to fix it," he added, "but I want to try." She waited a beat, then said, "You can't undo what's been done." "I know." She exhaled slowly, then replied, "Then start by doing better for your daughter." A pause. Then quietly, "I will." He didn't ask to visit. She didn't invite him. They both understood that healing would not come quickly, or maybe not at all, but the conversation ended without bitterness. That was enough for now. Later that week, Eleanor received a small envelope in the mail. Inside was a photograph, Sophie at the beach, holding a shell in one hand, wearing the snowflake scarf around her shoulders. On the back, scrawled in crooked blue ink, "For when I visit. Save a spot on your balcony." Eleanor smiled. She folded the photo carefully and placed it in the same drawer as the letter she had written for Sophie months earlier, the one marked "Open if I'm not here." Now it would remain sealed, because she was here, And maybe, just maybe, Sophie would be too. I once believed that family was the one place you didn't need an invitation to belong. That's how I began the blog post. It had taken me weeks to write. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I wasn't sure the words would matter. But something about Sophie's latest drawing, now taped beside my desk, her and me under a tree labeled Our Place, urged me forward. So I wrote. I used to think family was permanent, like the sun and the tide, there even when hidden, even when harsh. I thought love was proof enough, that decades of sacrifice, loyalty, and presence would grant me a seat at the table forever. But last Christmas, I discovered otherwise. I paused, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Outside, the ocean whispered as it always did. Figaro lay curled on the windowsill, twitching in his sleep. The sun was dipping, streaking the sky in burnt orange. I continued. I wasn't invited to Christmas. My family, my son, his wife, and the granddaughter I adore, went to the mountains without me. They didn't forget. They planned around me, with intention. I sat at home with untouched gifts under a tree I decorated alone. I watched stories online of my real family, laughing in matching pajamas while I reheated leftovers. The truth on the page wasn't sharp or angry. It was quiet, steady, like a pulse that had always been there, now finally visible. I wasn't left out by mistake. I was removed gently, silently, over time, with kindness as camouflage. That kind of betrayal cuts deeper than words ever could. The blog wasn't meant to be an expose. I didn't name names. I didn't recount every detail of legal forms, forged signatures, or financial manipulation. I didn't need to. The real story wasn't about what was taken. It was about what I reclaimed. I learned that losing your place at the table doesn't mean losing your worth, I wrote. It means building your own table. And when I finally stood up, when I said enough, I didn't just walk away. I walked home, to myself. I wrote about the women I'd met since, fellow survivors of family silence, caretakers turned castaways. We had coffee once a week now, a support circle disguised as a book club. We rarely finished the books. I wrote about starting over, about the first time I hung new curtains in a space that was truly mine, about how good it felt to buy groceries just for me, about the freedom of choosing solitude over tolerating cruelty. I lost a house, a title, a role, I typed, but I found clarity, peace, and the kind of self-respect I didn't know I'd been trading away. At the end of the post, I added something I hadn't planned, a photo. It was taken 2 days earlier by Clara, who had become more friend than lawyer. In the picture, I stood in front of my new apartment, one hand resting on the railing, wind catching the hem of my coat. My chin was lifted, my eyes were clear. I was smiling. Not the practice smile I used at family dinners, not the polite one reserved for neighbors and strangers, a real one. I uploaded the image and typed the final caption. Finally, I live in a house where I belong. Then I hit publish. Within hours, the blog began to spread. Comments poured in. Women from around the country, some older, some younger, all with stories that echoed mine. My daughter did the same, one wrote. She said I could stay as long as I followed the rules. I didn't realize those rules meant forgetting who I was. My son took over my accounts under the guise of helping, another said. Turns out, he was helping himself. Thank you for saying it out loud. I cried reading them. Not out of sadness, but relief. I wasn't alone. None of us were. A week later, I received a letter from Sophie, handwritten in blue ink, complete with stickers on the envelope. Grandma, it began, Daddy said you're doing okay and I'm glad. I miss you. Mom doesn't talk about what happened, but I remember the dinner. I remember your game. It was like a movie. I didn't understand it all, but I knew something big was happening. I knew you were brave. My scarf still smells like your house. I wear it when I miss you. I told my teacher you're my hero for starting over. She said that takes strength. I told her you've always had that. Love, Sophie. Inside the envelope was a photo she had drawn. 2 stick figures sitting under a big tree, holding hands. She'd labeled them me and Grandma. Between them was a table with a teapot and 2 cups. No one else was in the picture. I framed it and hung it beside the photo Clara had taken. 2 images, 2 truths. One, a goodbye. The other, a beginning. That night, I lit a candle on the windowsill and watched the ocean breathe in and out. For the first time in a long time, I felt no weight on my chest, no tension between my shoulders, no lingering ache of should-haves or could-haves, just stillness and belonging.